So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Carrie McClellan, and I will be doing today's webinar. The topic will be on Alzheimer's and dementia. I do want to give a special thank you to Elizabeth Mueller, who has sponsored the webinar for today. So thank you, Elizabeth. We greatly appreciate your support, and we'll get started. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to do just a brief overview about elder help, and then we'll talk about what is dementia and what is Alzheimer's, what are some of the risk factors, and we'll talk about the progression and safety considerations. We'll talk about how it relates to being a family caregiver, and we will bring in the holidays because that's a topic that is coming up more as we are nearing the holidays. So Elder Help's mission, we provide personalized services and information to help seniors remain independent and live with dignity in their own homes. We provide direct services through volunteers who help with a number of things in the home as well as transportation. And then we also provide care coordination and a roommate matching program called Home Share. For 45 years, we have been in operation, and we have identified that family caregivers are much a part of who we want to support and make sure that they're receiving the services needed. So what we created a couple of years ago is a program that's specific for family caregivers. We do focus on employed family caregivers, but our resources are available and relevant for all family caregivers. And through this program, we offer on-site presentations to local corporations or businesses. So we do lunch and learns on various topics related to being a family caregiver. We also attend different health or wellness expos that are hosted by employers. So if that's something that your employer is offering and you're looking for different resources to include, we could be one of those. We have created online courses. We currently have 4. We're working on our 5th one, and we have a lot of good information really setting the stage for what it is to be a family caregiver, some great assessment tools and different products to use there, as well as some helpful resources that could be beneficial to you. And of course, we offer these webinars on a monthly basis, and we change the topic every month. So thank you again for joining us today. So we'll start first with what is dementia. So dementia really is an umbrella term. There are a lot of different types of dementia. Most commonly we hear Alzheimer's, so we will touch on Alzheimer's as well. But really dementia is a term that is used to describe symptoms that can impair memory, communication, or the ability to complete daily activities that we need to do in order to continue living independently. So 2 or more of the following functions may be impaired when we do have somebody that is dealing with dementia. That could be memory. So in looking at memory, it could be short-term memory that's affected. That's usually what happens first. And long-term memory stays more intact for a while. Cognition relates to reasoning and judgment, trying to follow directions and kind of look at all of those different aspects of daily living. Behaviors that could relate to maybe personality changes that are starting to take place, or you're starting to notice something with your loved one that they haven't really exhibited in the past. And then, of course, physical functioning can be affected by somebody who is experiencing dementia and some of those symptoms. So about 50 of the cases of dementia will turn into Alzheimer's, and we'll talk a little bit more about Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's disease is very common that we hear talked about quite a bit. As I mentioned, there are other forms of dementia that we'll talk about in a few minutes. So this is a slow progressive disease of the brain, and that's something to keep in mind. A lot of people might not be aware that it is something that is progressive. We will talk about the different stages and what you can expect during those. But the brain that gets impaired really relates to the memory and the thinking and the behaviors that we just talked about. So the causes, there's a lot of research that is being done currently and that has been done related to Alzheimer's disease, and there are these indicators that look like proteins that are formed in the brain called plaques and tangles that are the cause of developing Alzheimer's disease. And those plaques and tangles start to form and start to be developed in our brains 20 or 30 years prior to us having any of the symptoms. So that's something to keep in mind. Alzheimer's disease is difficult to actually have a diagnosis for. It's mostly something that a doctor would evaluate, and there are a lot of different evaluations that they could do. Maybe it's questions that they ask or different scans, but really to be officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, that is done at time of death or during an autopsy. So it usually affects short-term memory more than long-term. So our long-term memory tends to stay more intact. So we can remember, things when we were a child or during our school years, but we might forget things that are happening today or this week or even a few minutes ago. There are nearly 65,000 individuals who have been diagnosed in San Diego County. And as I mentioned, the diagnosis really is done by doctors, and to officially diagnose somebody, it is done during an autopsy. But most often when the doctors are evaluating and making those doing different testing, they are correct about 90% of the time. So looking at dementia as a whole, and as I mentioned, Alzheimer's disease is one of the forms of dementia. There are many other forms, so you might hear of Lewy body dementia, you might hear of dementia related to somebody who has Parkinson's, there's frontal lobe dementia, so there's a number of different forms of dementia, but we most commonly hear about Alzheimer's. So about every 66 seconds, somebody in the United States develops dementia. And again, we'll talk about the different stages, but that could be that they're starting to experience some of the mild beginning stages. Since the year 2000, deaths that were caused by heart disease have declined by 14%, but dementia-related deaths have increased by 89%. And we're definitely seeing more people obviously living longer, and so that kind of has something to do with it as well, but it is something that we're seeing more common. So dementia is not a normal part of aging, and in a minute we'll talk about what is normal and what is not normal. And it is the 6th leading cause of death, so the numbers are just continuing to rise. 1 in 3 seniors will die as a result of some form of dementia. And as I mentioned, there's many types of dementia. So let's talk about normal aging. So if somebody, or ourselves even, if we miss one monthly payment here or there, that's normal. We have a lot going on. We are dealing with a lot of things day to day. And so having some of those forgetfulness moments, that's normal. We may forget a word or a name, but if it comes back to us, if we're able to recall it, that's where it is in the normal range there. We might occasionally misplace our keys or misplace a notebook that we wanted to keep track of. And again, if we're able to retrace our steps and find where we last saw them or where we might have put them in all of those different places, that is normal. Maybe people are starting to feel like they're not wanting to go out to social gatherings anymore, or start to be a little bit more isolated. That can be normal. There might be other things going on. Maybe there's physical limitations or hearing is starting to change, and that could limit somebody wanting to do those things. So it's just kind of looking at the context and when you add in everything else. Making poor decisions, we all make decisions. Sometimes they're good choices, sometimes they're not so good. But when somebody is starting to make more often poor decisions, that's when we would look at it not being as normal. So some of the common symptoms of dementia, so memory loss. So if you maybe forgot a detail of when you were 15 and you were at a camp, that is something that is more normal. But when somebody forgets what they have eaten for breakfast, or they don't remember what day of the week it is, they don't remember who the president is, those types of things that are more related to today, that's when we look at that memory loss. Difficulty with problem solving, so that can really encompass a lot of different things that we have to do in our day-to-day lives. It could be balancing a checkbook, or it could be following a recipe and staying on track with something that's been familiar to you for so long. Now you're noticing that that's becoming more difficult, or you're noticing that in your loved one that they're starting to have some changes with that. It could be trying to schedule doctor's appointments and making sure that they're staying on track with medications. That could become a little bit more difficult. Trouble finding words. So as we mentioned with the normal signs of aging, that's if you have difficulty finding a word, but you're able to find it, and you even if you remember it a little while later, that's okay. But when people are really struggling to find what word they're trying to use, and in their brain it's just not making sense. So also coming with that could be poor judgment. So when somebody is starting to make more poor decisions, they're not making maybe the right decisions. If somebody's coming to the door and wanting to sell different products to them, and they're inclined to buy something, that might not be a safe judgment call on their part. So it's just looking at all of those different aspects and looking at the judgment that they are making. Difficulty following directions. So that could be with maybe driving, going from one place to the next. If you are used to giving landmarks or giving different directions to your loved one, and now they're starting to have some more difficulty with the processing of that, and maybe they're getting lost when they're driving, those could be different examples. And then changes in personality or behaviors. So again, if maybe your loved one is starting to show more short-temperedness, or they're agitated, that could be because they are noticing some changes, and that can be scary for them to recognize that. So they may have some of those behaviors that are coming out. Maybe they have always had one personality and things are shifting a little bit. So just keeping aware of what's going on in their life. There may be other causes for that, or maybe other reasons, but just looking at everything as a whole and in context there. We do notice that people with dementia will have difficulty with their balance or coordination. Spatial awareness is definitely something that is more of a concern for people who maybe aren't able to notice when there's a step that they're going to take down. If they don't have that contrast in color or something that is distinguishing where they're going, spatially that might be a little bit challenging for them, and it might be scary for them to experience. Becoming lost in familiar places or losing common objects. So we talked about what is normal. So when you're starting to do that a little bit more often, maybe you're forgetting where you're leaving your car in a parking lot and you always park in the same place every single time. Maybe there's things that are changing, and so the appearances of certain shopping centers or stores aren't the same. So we all might have some of that, but it's when it becomes more obvious and more apparent and happening on a more frequent basis, that's when we get a little bit more concerned. So there is a progression when we look at dementia or Alzheimer's too, and the kind of average length that somebody might live with the disease is about 8.5 years, but it could range from between 2 to 20 years. So that's a long period of time, but on average it's about 8.5 years. It is a slow decline, so there is a progression that you will typically see, and that might be different for everybody. It might take a different amount of time to go through those different changes, but you tend to kind of see that pathway. So we'll talk about the 3 different stages. Early, so kind of those beginning stages, and then middle to moderate, or late stage, more severe cognitive impairment. We'll talk about those. So in the early stage, and that can begin up to 20 years before a diagnosis is actually made. And so we're looking at kind of the short-term memory loss. We're seeing some forgetfulness and making those poor decisions or making poor judgment calls, maybe forgetting what they had for breakfast occasionally, or forgetting who's coming to visit them starts to happen, or missing appointments. We did talk about a little bit with the driving, but that's something that usually in the early stages you're on the fence with it. Is your loved one still safe to drive? They seem to only go to the grocery store or go to the bridge club that they're used to attending, or maybe church services. And so they kind of stay within a short distance of their home. Most often people start to only drive during the day before they stop driving completely. But that's something to just be mindful of if your loved one is talking about how they're not feeling as comfortable, or they're going to start taking back their driving and only limit it to certain times of the day or to different places. And then looking at, are they safe to drive? Are they able to continue making those calls when the roads are busy and there's a lot of people out there? Are they taking precautions that are necessary? Managing money and making meals. So those are part of our daily activities that we're needing to do. So managing money, making sure that your loved one is able to balance their checkbook properly, that they're staying on track with their bills, that they are not being victimized by the scams that are coming through the mail, or that they're being able to recognize when something is legitimately needing to be paid and when it's somebody that is trying to take advantage of them. And then making meals, so following the different directions of a recipe that they're used to making. Those things might change over time, and they may already be making more easy meals and something that just takes a few ingredients to do. It could be that their stamina is changing as well, but just kind of keeping aware of what noticing changes that you're observing. And then they're learning, is it more difficult for them to learn new things? As we age, our processing tends to take more time, so that's normal. But maybe they are used to learning different things, and now they're really struggling with following directions and making sure that they are on top of that. So the middle to moderate stage, that stage is the longest stage, and it can last anywhere from 2 to 10 years. That's when you would see more confusion, more memory loss, and more disorientation. So maybe they don't know what day of the week it is. They're forgetting who the president is or who's coming to visit them. They're needing more reminders on when to take their medications, when to eat meals, those types of things. Language and communication challenges, you'll also notice some of that. And there's a term that is often used with word salad, to where you know that the person is really trying and that they're wanting to explain the concept or wanting to explain something to you, but the words aren't coming out that way. So what they're saying is really not making sense, and in their brain that's frustrating, so you might see more of that agitation as well, because to them that's a scary moment for them to feel like they know what they're trying to say, but it's not coming out that way. And they might start to experience having more difficulty with their personal care. So maybe bathing and their dressing, meal preparation, again, those types of things might become more difficult, or you're noticing that they aren't putting their clothes on properly. Maybe they're forgetting how to buckle their belt, or how to button their shirts. So those are just some examples that might start to change. Wandering is definitely a concern, and that's something that should be taken into consideration with anybody who is on the spectrum of dealing with dementia in the beginning stages or middle or moderate, and especially in the severe. But wandering may happen more at different times of the day. You may hear the term being used of sundowning, And that's really when the sun goes down in that evening time. You may tend to see a little bit more behaviors with your loved one and changes that you're not seeing earlier in the day, and wandering is one of those. They may be looking for something, so it could be that their home doesn't look familiar to them at that time. Maybe they're thinking that they're in their childhood home, or they need to get home, and so they might be wandering to try and find that place. Or maybe they think they need to be going to work. That's something that is common for people to kind of forget where they are in today, and they're going back to 30, 40, 50 years ago when they were working and taking the train or picking up the kids, doing those types of things. So that could be a sign that your loved one is more in the middle or moderate stage. And as it progresses into the late stage, you will see more of those severe symptoms. So this stage can last up to 5 years. And again, everybody's experience might be a little bit different, but this tends to be the shortest stage. So there, in the progression of communication, you may see that there is more difficulty with verbalizing. Some of your loved ones may become nonverbal, so they may start to not know how to speak at all. We talked about the word salad, and where words are coming out differently, or they're trying to express themselves, and that concept is coming out in a different way. But they may, over time, lose their ability to communicate. So this is often when 24-hour supervision is needed. That may start to happen in the moderate or middle stage as well, where you're feeling like the safety is just really concerning, and you're wanting to make sure that your loved one does have that supervision on a 24-hour basis. But really in the late and severe stages, that's when it's most commonly needed. They may start to have difficulty with chewing or swallowing or eating. So they might need help with all of those different things. And their bodies just aren't really knowing how to do those functions anymore. So it's normal for us now, but as the disease progresses, that starts to change. And then physical activity. So you may see people who are shuffling, or maybe not picking up their feet like they used to, or having difficulty with their physical activity and getting around their home. Those are all normal things that are seen during the stages of somebody who does have dementia. So that's something to keep in mind. Some people during the later stages may need to more use a wheelchair and be helped with the different aspects of getting around. So I know we've touched on some of the safety concerns, but we'll just go through them. So driving, that is something that comes up quite a bit for people who are still driving, and maybe you're noticing that they are starting to become a little bit more forgetful and getting lost when they're driving. That's a concern for anybody. Having that conversation is very difficult, and as family members, it is challenging for us to know the right way to bring up the driving concerns that we have. A lot of times a physician, if your loved one is going to a physician on a more regular basis, even annually or every 6 months, they may start to notice some of those things and have concerns with their driving if they ask if your loved one is still driving. But that's a good opportunity for you to bring it up during an appointment or mention it to the doctor ahead of time so that they can talk to your loved one about it and at least plant the seed that might be something that needs to change. They could also recommend that your loved one's abilities are tested by the DMV. There are different driving programs. AARP offers them as well. It's called Safe Driving, where you can have your loved one assessed and they can learn different tips if they're in that beginning stage or even before they are showing any of those signs. So that's something to keep in mind. But it is important to recognize when your loved one is no longer safe to drive so that we can make sure we're addressing that, and they will be looking for their car keys. They'll be looking for their car because that's something that's normal for them, that they're used to doing and having that control. And it can be a little scary for somebody who has that independence and feeling like that's being taken away. But it's the safety for them and others on the road that we need to look at. So those warning signs, we've gone through quite a bit of that, but just keeping an eye out for any of those changes that you're seeing with your loved one. Having that ability to turn off the stove or make sure that they're cooking their meals safely, or if they drink tea that they're turning off the teapot. All of those different things, if you notice it occasionally, keep an eye out for it, because it might start to happen more frequently, and you can be aware of that. So different tips to limiting driving. We talked a little bit about what your loved one might do automatically, but a lot of times people will start to limit their driving maybe at night. During the night when it's dark, it's a little bit more difficult for us to see certain things. The lights might be lower in certain areas, or the signs are difficult to see, so they might taper that back and only be driving during the day. That's something that you could also recommend to your loved one if you're noticing just a little bit of changes. Maybe talk to them about, let's start, I'll pick you up when we go to dinner in the evening, and during the daytime you can still go to the grocery store and do different things, but let's just see how that goes. So there's different services that are available to help with that as well. And then avoiding driving, again, talking to the doctor is important. You can also recommend that your loved one is assessed by the DMV, so that they're the ones doing that assessment. But try and ride with your loved one and see how you feel, and see if they're following all of the appropriate rules to make sure that that you're aware of all of that. Wandering, of course, we know is a big safety concern for people, and that tends to happen more in the moderate to severe stages of dementia. But that's something that can happen, especially if your loved one is still living alone. That's something to keep in mind. There's a lot of really good devices that you can put sensors on the doors, or there's different tips that we can offer to you as well. Maybe putting a certain sign on the door that makes it look like they're outside if they feel like they need to be outside, so that they're staying at home and staying safer. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. And about 60% of people with dementia will wander, so that's pretty common. Locking, the door, making sure that your loved one is safe, but understanding why they're wandering, maybe having those conversations so that you can help redirect. Medications, that's a big concern for people, because if your loved one is still managing all of their own medications, but you're noticing some changes, there are great medication dispensers that you can use to put your loved one's medications in on a monthly basis, so you don't have to go over there every day and feel like you're needing to do that. But you want to make sure that you're monitoring the medication. So you want to be notified if your loved one misses their medications, or if they're looking to take more than what is prescribed. So definitely our suggestion is to keep them locked and labeled, especially once your loved one starts to become in more of the moderate and middle stages. So some things with home safety or fall prevention. So fall prevention is something that is very important, kind of looking at what things in the home can reduce the chance of having a fall, so that your loved one doesn't go down that path would be good. Home safety is a big part of that, because a majority of the falls that people experience are at home. They tend to be in the bathrooms, but they could also be in different parts of the home. Throw rugs are something to consider removing, especially if your loved one is starting to shuffle and maybe not picking their feet up. Spatially, that's something that could help with making sure that they aren't confused with the different patterns. So if you have a different pattern of a carpet that's on top of another carpet, your loved one may think that it's a change in height, and instead, so they're kind of walking around doing that if there's different carpets that are being used. So just keep that in mind. You might want to put a strip of tape or something at the bottom of a stair, so that they know that that's the next stair or the last one, and then it's going to be a flat surface, just so they have some of those triggers, but definitely keeping in mind that a lot of changes in print could add to confusion. Lighting is really important. So as we age, we need more light So that goes in the kitchen. That also goes when you're reading or in the bathroom. So if your loved one is getting up in the middle of the night, make sure that you're adding in extra lighting. It could be that you have light sensors, so when they walk past in the hallway, a light turns on to help them get to the restroom more safely. So there's a lot of different touch lights and different options that you could use. There are also personal response buttons. So if you're not familiar, a lot of people know about I've fallen and I can't get up. So that's if your loved one does live at home alone. It's really important to add that in as a safety measure, but they could push the button to get assistance if they do have a fall or if they're experiencing another type of emergency. And through that, they'll have a certain protocol that they follow with who they're notifying in the case that your loved one does push that button. So it could be that they notify you, could be that they notify a neighbor who could go and check on them, or it could be that 911 is being called and the paramedics will be there. Something to keep in mind with that, there are certain buttons that are coming out now that have fall detection within them. So if your loved one isn't able to push the button on their own, maybe they don't understand what to push, but they do have a fall, that could also trigger the emergency contact to be notified. So that's something to keep in mind. I had mentioned our online courses that ElderHelp had created. And those you can get to through our website, elderhelpofsandiego.org, and it's under our family caregiving page. But our fourth course, I wanted to mention that specifically it talks more about Alzheimer's and dementia, and we do have a home safety checklist that is specific for people who are experiencing memory loss or having difficulty with their cognition. So I encourage you to take a look at that so you can go throughout the different rooms in your loved one's home and really see what is needing to be adjusted for their safety. And if they live with you too, there's some really good tips on there. So what are some of the risk factors for developing dementia or Alzheimer's disease? So age is one of the biggest risk factors, because as we get over the age of 65, our chances of developing Alzheimer's or dementia increases, and once we get to the age of 85, the chances double. So there's definitely a lot that goes into it related to age. We are living longer, so we're seeing that more commonly. So people who are living longer obviously are going to go over that age 85, so their chances of developing the disease are going to increase. Females live longer, so that's something that to keep in mind, that they are more likely to develop Alzheimer's or dementia. There are other health conditions that can be risk factors as well. So hypertension, blood pressure. So if you have difficulty with your blood pressure, or you know that your loved one does, have those conversations with their physician and see if there's anything specifically that you need to be on the lookout for. Heart disease, so if our hearts aren't pumping the blood properly, those are different things that might affect our bodies, and that might start to develop it. Type 2 diabetes, there's so many different conditions that are related, but type 2 diabetes is one that does have a lot of comorbidities a lot of times associated with it. So if your loved one does have diabetes, that's something to consider that may come down the line. Injury to the head, so if your loved one played any sports when they were younger, or if they've been in car accidents and they've had any head trauma, that's something that could cause dementia or Alzheimer's to develop. And then formal education. So it's so important to keep our brains active and learning. So that's something that could be a risk factor depending on the number of years of formal education that your loved one has. And then Down syndrome. So that's something that most people are familiar with, but if somebody does have Down syndrome, they very much will develop Alzheimer's as time goes on. So that's something to keep in mind. So how can you lower your risk? Exercise and diet. I think those are the two common things that can really lower your risk for so many different chronic illnesses and different diseases. So exercise, it doesn't mean that you have to be running marathons or that your loved one needs to start running marathons, but it's making sure that we're keeping our bodies as healthy as they can possibly be. So it could be that you're encouraging your loved one to participate in different exercise classes, or making sure that they're at least walking throughout the day. There's a lot of things that can be done at home as well. So if your loved one isn't interested in going to an actual class, although that would be really good because you also have the socialization piece there too. But there are different options for doing things at home. And then diet, making sure that you're getting those brain health vitamins in, so blueberries or different good healthy fats. There's a lot of different things with our diet that we can work on to make sure that our bodies are as healthy and our brains are as healthy as they can be. Intellectual activities, so not only exercising our bodies, but exercising our brains. So encourage those word searches, or doing Sudoku, or different activities that your loved one wants to do or has always done. Encourage them to continue doing those for as long as possible, because the more that we exercise our brain, the better off we're going to be. Emotional health, so if your loved one does experience depression or anxiety, those are some risk factors, so just making sure that you are getting them the treatment that they need. So that could be that they are getting out of the house and making sure that they are staying social and staying connected to people in the community and friends and those social gatherings that they've always enjoyed. That alone will be a good help for anybody. So encourage those types of things and help them to manage whatever is going on. You know, a lot of times for people who are experiencing changes in their health, maybe they have a new diagnosis or they're taking new medications, maybe they've had a loss of a friend or a loved one, those types of things can affect their health as well. So just making sure that that they're getting the care that they need. Tobacco use, that's another thing. If you don't use tobacco, that right there is as a way that you're lowering your risk, and for your loved ones too. So that's something to keep in mind. So caring for someone with dementia, there's no easy task that comes with caring for somebody who does have dementia, especially because you know it is going to progress. So there are different things that you can do to plan ahead, but knowing that somebody's experience may be very different from your experience, so keeping that in mind. Everybody is going to go through things a little bit differently, but if you can kind of plan ahead and look at the trajectory, you'll be able to figure out what the next step will be, and that will help both you and your loved one. So it's important to create a plan not only for your loved one and looking at the different levels of care that may be needed. In the beginning, they might not need additional support as much. You're just checking in with them. But as time goes on, maybe you're starting to go and help a little bit more often, or you're needing to create that care team of people who can help out. It could also be that you're looking at more formal caregiving options, so hiring a caregiver to help with meal preparation, or looking at different places if your loved one won't be able to stay at home safely until their final days. Maybe you're looking at what assisted living facilities are available in the area. So just planning ahead and looking at what that means for not only you, your loved one, but also for you, because you as the caregiver need to plan for what that looks like and what that might change for your life too. Of course, looking at the different safety precautions that need to be made at each stage of the progression. And again, if you are interested, take a look at our 4th course through our website. That will give you a good safety checklist to go through for the different stages. So just a few tips for you as a caregiver. Try and be flexible. Know that your loved one is going through a lot of changes too, and what your visits may have looked like for the past several years may not be the same anymore. So just try and be as flexible as possible so that your expectations are not out of range. And be present, be in the moment with your loved one and recognize that, they might be in a different space and maybe they are talking about, that they need to go to work, or that, they need to take care of their children, or they need to make dinner because their husband or their wife is going to be coming home. So recognizing that they're maybe going to be in a different time frame, and join them in that journey. So don't try and bring them back to reality over and over, because that might become very frustrating for them and also for you. And try and adapt to a new normal. There might be changes that are needing to be made, and that's okay, but recognizing that and adjusting to that is needed. So just a few ideas for care options if you're feeling like, it is time for you to bring in some support for your loved one. Maybe they do live with you, maybe they live at home, maybe they live out of state and you're looking at that from afar. So just keeping an eye out for those different signs over the phone or when you go and visit. But there are different options that can provide some care support to you and your loved one at different stages. Respite care is something to keep in mind and consider. That is giving you, the caregiver, a break. So even if you work full-time and you're stopping by to visit your loved one every evening and help make sure that they take their medications properly or getting their meals ready, you might need a break from that one evening. So there are different programs that are available, whether it's through a volunteer program, like Alzheimer's San Diego, or whether it's through a formal caregiving home care agency that you would hire somebody to come in a couple of times a week. But there are different options for you to have that respite care. And if you are starting to notice that your loved one needs more one-on-one care throughout the day or overnight, then in-home care might be the option that is best for your loved one and for you to make sure that they have somebody that's there helping them throughout the day and getting them what they need. There are also adult day centers that are spread throughout most communities, and they often have really good programming for people with dementia, whether it's the beginning stages or moderate to severe. So they have socialization, they have different educational topics that they might cover. They also often offer meals and medication reminders and management. So those are really good options if your loved one is still able to get out of the house and you want to make sure that they're in a safe place during the day. That could be a good option for them. So we are going to just touch on the caregiving and the holidays, especially we have Thanksgiving right around the corner, and then Christmas or other holidays that might come up. So we tend to set very high expectations for ourselves, and we have maybe done things the same way year after year, and we want to recreate that for our families and for your loved one. But try and keep in mind that it's okay to make some modifications. Your loved one may be okay with that too. It might be more difficult for them to be around a room full of people, and maybe they want to have a smaller celebration, and that's okay too. So just kind of keeping that in mind and having those conversations with the rest of your family or with your loved one so that you can make sure that you're keeping everybody's suggestions into consideration, but knowing that it's okay to make changes, and maybe that big family gathering that you've always had every single year does need to change and maybe go smaller so that your loved one doesn't feel as overwhelmed and you don't feel as overwhelmed planning for it. So allowing others to contribute, and it's okay to feel the guilt around any of these things. You know, it's really tough to be a family caregiver, whether you're doing that on a daily basis, whether you're a long distance caregiver, or just thinking ahead. But I think we're really hard on ourselves, and so it's okay to take a step back and realize that you're doing the best that you can, and it's okay to be good enough. You know, we're just doing the best we can. We're all human, and your loved one recognizes that as well. So local here in San Diego, I just wanted to mention a couple of services and organizations that can help to support you. Alzheimer's San Diego is one of those. They are a great organization, as I mentioned, a volunteer program that they operate. It's called Alz Companions, and that's a really good option for having a volunteer come in once a week or every other week for a 4-hour period of time to give you a break and also give your loved one additional socialization. They also offer a medic alert, which is a bracelet that your loved one can wear that has the important information there, so that if they were to wander or weren't able to find where they needed to go back home, they could have somebody recognize that from their bracelet. And I believe they offer that for free, so check out their website. The Take Me Home program is offered through the San Diego Sheriff's Department, and that's where you can register your loved one and put in details about them. So maybe it's what they look like, different ways to help redirect them if they do get lost and you do need to notify the Sheriff's Department of that. They can then know how to handle your loved one when they do find them. So that's a really great program. Southern Caregiver Resource Center, they offer one-on-one counseling. They also offer different support groups throughout the county, as well as educational presentations. So they're a really good resource to know about. And their website is caregivercenter.org. And then the UCSD Alzheimer's Caregiver Study, they often look at caregivers and what health related aspects might be coming in to being a caregiver. So there's often studies that are being done if you want to participate in that. And then nationally, the Alzheimer's Association is a great resource, and they have a 1-800 phone number that you could call 24 hours a day. That, I think, is something really important to keep in mind, especially if your loved one is showing behaviors, or in the middle of the night they might wake up and think that it's daytime and you're not sure how to redirect them. That Alzheimer's Association 24/7 line is going to be a really good resource for you, because you could call them and they could help walk you through some scenarios. There are different area agencies on aging. Every county has them. So if you do a Google search, you'll be able to find what resources are available in your loved one's area if your loved one does live out of town. So I am going to open it up for questions. So if you have any, you're welcome to send those through the chat line. And if you don't have any or don't want to ask them in the group setting, you can always feel free to email us, and I'll put up our information there. I do want to take a moment just to thank again Elizabeth Mueller for sponsoring this webinar. It is a very important topic, and there's so many family caregivers that are experiencing a lot of these things with their loved ones. So thank you again for your support on that. We're getting a question on how do you find that home safety checklist again. So great question. So if you go to elderhelpofsandiego.org, you will go to services or solutions for living. We now have it. And under that, you'll see family caregivers. When you click on that page, you'll be able to connect to our online courses, and it's in the 4th course. So it should be pretty easy to find that, and if you have any difficulty, my email address is up there, so feel free to let me know. And then We're having a question about the understanding the difference in the diagnosis of dementia versus Alzheimer's. So dementia is the umbrella term. So one way to think of it is dementia is similar to cancer. There's a lot of different types of cancer, just like there's a lot of different types of dementia. The most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's. And so when physicians are looking at different cognitive changes, they might do a mini mental exam. They might ask your loved one to do a variety of tests in the office. But in order to actually diagnose Alzheimer's, that's typically done through an autopsy. So there's not necessarily going to be a clear way to do that. They might do an MRI or some brain scans that give you the plaques and tangles and might show some of those things. But really, you're going to be looking at dementia as a whole. I do know that Alzheimer's San Diego does testing in their office, so that's something to consider as well. All right, I think that's it. So thank you all so much for joining me today, and I hope that was helpful. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to email us. The email for the Employed Family Caregiver Support Program would go through corporate_relations@elderhelpofsandiego.org. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.